Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me today on this special workshop that I've put together in conjunction with TemplateMonster. My name is Richard Pearce and I'm coming to you today from Sydney, Australia, where it's 8 o'clock in the morning. I've got the kids off to school and I'm all pretty much set up in my little backyard cabin. A couple of housekeeping things. If things go wrong, if suddenly I drop out, hang in there for a few minutes as it might be an issue at my end, and I'll try and get reconnected. In the event that you don't see me again, then you could check on Twitter perhaps by looking at Richard O. Pearce, that's the letter O, Richard O. Pearce, and I'll put a message up there to try and let you know what's going on. Apart from that, I've got a whole lot of exciting things to share with you. This is a workshop today. I'm going to come back and mention that again in a moment. So it's not just me talking. There's a couple of things that I'm going to ask you to consider as well. And by the end, I'm really hopeful that you'll have been able to answer the question that I've posed, which is, do you have what it takes to earn $4,000 as a part-time web designer? So I'm going to go through a number of topics and I might as well kick things off now. I think we've given people enough time to join up. So bear with me, as it's been a little while since I've done one of these, and I think I've got to hit the share button there. Share that part of the screen and hit play. And then we should be all ready to go in business. Okay. I think I should start off by just giving you a little bit of my background. So I started in this whole web design game way back in 1995. And back then, when the web was very new, I'd been sort of playing around with the web for a couple of years before that. There was very little out there. There was no Google, there was no Amazon. There wasn't even much in the way of a web browser. Back then I was using a thing that most people have never heard of called Mosaic. And then Netscape came along and then others. I was lucky in the sense that I got in the very early days of the web. And I was working for a retail store here in Sydney, and they knew that I'd sort of messed around on the internet a little bit. And they asked me, can you build us a website? We're a technology store. We'd like to be really early into this whole web thing. They could see it was going to take off. And so like any good entrepreneur, I said, yes, of course I can build you a website, without having any idea how to do that. And then I just scrambled like crazy to make it happen. There was very little information available back then as to how to do all of this stuff. And so I just had to have a lot of trial and error. I found a book. There was a website called Art and the Zen of the Internet or something. And between all of that, we scrambled together a fairly basic website, which did the job. We got inquiries from around the world, made sales directly via email in those days. And I went on to do that for a couple of years, and then I decided I don't want to do it part-time anymore. I'd like to get into this full-time. I was really loving it. And so that's what I did. And then over 16 and a half years, I went and built about 100 websites. That's a big number in one sense, but not in another sense. A lot of people have done many more websites in that time than I did. But I got a huge amount of experience, and that's what I'm hoping to share these days with people like yourself. And that's what I'm doing. I, for some years, taught people how to build Joomla websites. I still do that a little bit, but I'm mainly these days teaching people how to start and grow their own web design businesses. And yes, home for me these days is in Sydney, Australia. One of the reasons I decided to put this workshop together is because I've been aware over the last few years that a lot of people jump into things without really considering what the end result might be. And I would hate it if you decided to start or maybe restart your existing web design business without really having a clear picture of what life is going to look like for you when you do that. So I'm really trying to avoid you saying in 6 or 12 months, well, I didn't realise it would be like this. And you probably know from your own life experience or that of others that maybe have gone through a 3 or 4 year university degree and then come out the other side and found themselves asking the question, well, what do I do now? And they get into a job and they start hating it. They've just wasted 3 or 4 years of their life and they're thinking, I didn't realise it would be like this. So hopefully I can prevent that from happening to you partly as a result of today's workshop. So yes, the purpose of today's workshop is to help you picture what life would look like if you became a part-time and then perhaps eventually a full-time web designer. I want to avoid you starting and then hating it and understand what you're in for. And I tend to think that anything in life that you look at doing, you maybe subconsciously are asking yourself 3 questions. The first question that you're going to probably ask is just, should I do this? Is this something that I should be doing? In our case, should I be a web designer? And after you've answered that question, if the answer is yes, then it's, can I do this? Do you have the skills to be able to do this? What's required? And then the final question, how do I do this? Now, in terms of these three questions, I'm hoping that today's workshop is going to answer question number one. Should I do this? And I appreciate that some of you are possibly already doing this, and that's okay. There's still a lot that you're going to be able to get out of today's workshop. The next question, if you answer yes, is can I do this? Ordinarily, I would then encourage you to go and buy a little mini course that I've got together that helps answer that question. But in conjunction with TemplateMonster today, I'm actually able to bring that to you for free, and I've got information about that at the end of this workshop. And then there's a question, if you answer can I in the affirmative, there's how do I do this? And I've got a number of ways that I can teach you how to do this. I did promise though that this would be, excuse me, a no sales workshop. And so I'm not going to promote that now. Excuse me one sec. If this is something that you're interested in pursuing further, you've got my email address now. That's my personal email address. You're welcome to reach out to me to see if that's something I can help you with further. I'd also like to just clarify what I mean by web designer, because this is sometimes a term that puts people off. When I talk about designer, it's designer, developer, programmer, coder, whatever. In terms of today's content and other things that I teach, I use these terms interchangeably. I tend to use web design more often though, because that's the term that was used when I started, almost 25 years ago. It was all about web design. And so it doesn't matter if you have no design skills. It doesn't matter if you have no coding skills, because I'm more interested in the business side of things. You can always outsource the design or the coding to other people these days relatively inexpensively if you don't have particular skills. So don't let the term that I use, web design, put you off necessarily. Now, this is also a workshop. It's not a lecture. You're expected to do some work. And for those of you that registered at least a day ago, you should have received an email linking you to a document which challenged you to answer some questions. If you haven't received that, and because today's registration didn't go out in the time that I expected it would, I suspect that some of you haven't received that email or haven't had an opportunity to look at that yet. That's okay. There'll be plenty of time as I go through the very basic questions that only take you really a few seconds to consider. But please get involved. You might even want to grab a tablet, piece of paper and a pencil if you wish. Okay, now, although today's workshop is about how to start your own web design business, I appreciate that some people might not quite be there yet in their mind. And they might be thinking, well, I want a bit of a side hustle, but I'm not sure if that's going to be web design or something else. Therefore, you're not even really ready for me to talk about what I'm about to talk about, and I need to address that. So I want to talk about this question: is web design the best way to make money online? Because there are plenty of great ways to make money online. And frankly, if you see anyone sort of espousing, this is the best way to do this and this is the best way, you should run a mile. I can be objective enough to understand that this isn't the best way to make money online for everyone. I like it clearly because I had a 16.5-year career out of this. I'm going to be very biased towards this, but I can still look at things objectively, and that's what I'd like to do now. And so the first activity that I've got for you is to consider, what do you think is the best thing and what do you think is the worst thing about being a freelance web designer? You might want to take a few seconds to think about that now. Just thinking about this question a little bit more deeply though, there is no best way to make money online. The best way to make money online is what's best for you. We're all unique, we're all individuals, and so that's, again, a question that I hope that you will be able to answer by the end of this. Right, so what do you think is the best thing and the worst thing about being a freelance web designer? I'm now going to talk through the 10 highs and lows of web design based on my experience, and it'll be interesting to see if the points that I mention are the same as the ones that you might have written down. I'm going to contrast each one. I've got 5 highs and 5 lows. And again, I'm doing this to try and help you to try and picture, what life is going to be like for you if you start a web design business, so that you aren't one of the ones that, a year or two down the track think, oh, didn't think it'd be like this. And the first one is a high. It's that every project is a new experience. Think about this. This isn't the number one reason that I got into web design, but it's the reason that kept me there for a long time. It's fantastic to be able to go out to a client, meet them for the first time, talk about their business, talk about the project that they want with their website, and go through all of that from very beginning right all the way to the end, and then not necessarily be tied into that project for the rest of my working life. And if you ask web designers that have been doing this for a number of years, they will say similar things, that it's just great that there's always something new going on. Contrast that though with a bit of a low, and that is when a project's finished, you've got to go and find your next client. And that takes work. And that's different to a lot of other business models. So the high is every project is a new experience. The low is you've then got to go out and look for your next project. The big reason I got into this is the next high, which is you're the boss. You get to choose the hours that you work to an extent, and you get to choose what you do and how you do it, who to work with, again, to an extent. And that to me was the number one thing, much more so than money. So that's a big reason to get into this for those who like independence. But again, you've got to contrast that because you're the boss, but really your client's the boss. And sometimes they look like this. You're working for clients, and sometimes that means you've got to make compromises. If a client wants a website to work in a particular way and you think they're stupid, the client is the one that's paying the bills, and so you sometimes have to compromise and go with what they want. Sure, that's perfectly acceptable, and in fact, I would encourage you to challenge clients if you think that they're requesting something that you disagree with, and that's a part of being in business, and clients can appreciate that. I can think of many occasions when, probably the best example was, did a really big project, a $20,000 project, and the client said, we want to use Comic Sans as the font because it's a project for children. And so my designer at the time and I said, oh, you really don't want to use that. And we pushed back a little bit. They said, oh no, that's really the look we're after. And we found this fantastic retro, funky looking font and showed them that. And they said, oh yeah, that's much better. And so we were able to win that argument. And they were very happy because of that. So it's okay to challenge your client, but at the end of the day, there will be many occasions where you're going to get frustrated because you're ending up doing things that you disagree with. This is not necessarily the main reason why people get into web design, but yes, you can make a lot of money. Now, if you're doing this already and you're thinking, oh, how do I make a lot of money as a web designer? You know, I'm stuck in this $500 website rut, then you need more training. There are loads of businesses that will pay $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. I just mentioned I had a $20,000 project, and that's happening every day, and that's business that could be going to you. If right now you think, I don't know how to get out of that, then we need to talk further. But yes, there is the opportunity to make a lot of money in this business. But then you have to contrast that with the next low, which is there can be a phenomenon called the fortune to famine cycle. I remember one month I actually invoiced $20,000 worth of work for a whole lot of projects. It was an amazing month. And I thought, wow, I'm on the way to really making big money out of this. But then the next month, it was $600. So you do need to build the business in such a way that you've got some recurring revenue, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But that is a low that will happen at any time in any sort of self-employment, is that your income will vary from month to month. Okay, the next big one, and this is more important to most people than money, is that you can love this work. It's really enjoyable. If you enjoy interacting with computers and software, and you do need to have some ability to be able to interact with people as well, this can be a really, really enjoyable job when things are going well. I mentioned at the start of the highs and lows that one of the big ones is that every project is a new experience. That was great. Seeing the project come to life, it was really great as well. And seeing, you know, the bills getting paid, that's all very exciting. But you know what? That's not every day. There are times when you will hate your job, where you get a client who's just insane, who stretches things out despite the fact that they've signed a contract to say that they won't. That's not always their fault, by the way. Sometimes you've chosen a bad client, and you know, when I look back at projects that went bad, I can see that I shouldn't have taken it on in the first place. That comes with experience. There are days where coding, you know, if you're a coder, if you're programming something and it just doesn't work, or you get it right and the next day it's broken again and you don't know why. It can be frustrating, this sort of work, like you wouldn't believe. The hours sometimes can be long. Again, you can get around that to a certain extent if you've built your business well with a good system. I'm going to come to that. But there are days where you're going to absolutely hate what you do. I think that's the case with most jobs, but certainly something to consider. My last high that I'd like to mention is that there is minimal ongoing marketing once you've started. So I like the picture of the rowing boat here for a couple of reasons. Years ago when I had a different body, I used to row. And so I like this analogy because I know from experience that it takes an enormous amount of energy to get that boat moving through the water. There's the weight of the shell, the oars, all the rowers. And so you've really got to work super, super hard at the beginning to get the momentum going. Once you've got that momentum going though, it's just a case of moving the oars through the water, and it's much, much easier at that point. The reason that I mention this is that it's in contrast to a lot of other business models. Lots of businesses, you're forever having to plow money and time and effort into your marketing. Certainly at the beginning with this business, yes, you do have to do a lot of marketing, but once things are going and you've got word of mouth and you've got a lot of leads, which I'm going to talk a bit about in a moment, then things are just going along. You can't stop. You can't stop rowing, but once the momentum's going, it's great. The downside of that though, the last low that I've listed here, is that you do need to prepare to get uncomfortable. This will be the case in any form of self-employment. In the case of web design, you will need to get out and talk to people, make connections, not cold calling or anything sort of creepy like that, but I mean, you can do that if you want, but you do need to get out and talk to people and be prepared to sell. If you can't sell, and that's a skill that you can learn, but if you can't sell or you're not prepared to sell, you're in trouble. And so it's hard at the beginning. All right, so they're my highs and lows of web design. And I hope that that's helped to answer the question. And how did you go? Was the thing that you thought might be the best and the worst part of the job, was that one of the ones that I mentioned or something else? Be interested to know. I'd like to also spend a little bit of time, just as we're still considering whether web design is the best way of making money online, considering how web design compares with other ways of making money online. I have some experience with this, as I'll discuss as I go through. And the first comparison I'm going to make is with e-commerce, and I know a bit about this. I have a garage full of products. I've got a couple of small e-commerce sites as a way to help break up my day sometimes. It's hard to do training all day, every day, I find, so it's nice to be able to have that on the side. And I get a little bit of help with it as well. But e-commerce is a tricky one. Let's talk about the pros first of all. If you wanted to start an e-commerce business, it's relatively passive. It's quite possible that by the time this workshop ends that I'll have a new order there and I hadn't had to sit in front of the computer or talk to a person to get that order. It just comes in. It's also reasonably flexible. You can fit that into the hours that you've got available, which is a nice thing about e-commerce. I've got to tell you, after doing this now for, gosh, I think about 5 years, there are some big disadvantages. And one of them is that you need a lot of capital for e-commerce. It took me a while to sort of tweak to the fact that if you're making 30% profit margin on an e-commerce product, you've got to sell 70% of your inventory just to break even. And that means that you need a lot of money up front before you're going to make a profit. If you want to grow the business, you're forever pouring more money into it to be able to buy more stock. So it's very poor cash flow. It's the sort of business that can send you broke if you're not careful. So e-commerce is tricky. I appreciate that if you've got a drop ship model, then that changes things a little bit because you're not paying for the stock up front. I chose not to follow that model for various reasons. So it's a tricky one. If you compare that though to a web design business, web design has very low capital requirements, both upfront and ongoing. And once you get to a point where you make enough money, you can get some quite good leverage by getting some other people to help you with that, with the day-to-day work. Blogging is another way of making money online. This one is one that sort of gets under my skin a bit because there's a lot of people teaching people who want to make money online that all you've got to do is set up a blog, write a bunch of articles and put some ads up on your site and you'll make a fortune. Some people have done that, but the vast majority of people from what I've read really struggle to make decent money by just having a blog. The pros are though, it is highly passive. I mean, you don't have to be in front of the computer at all to earn your income. But the cons are, it takes a long time to make money. It's hard to build an audience. It's hard to just rely on SEO to get people through to your website. So if you're looking to make some money in the short term, I don't feel, in my experience, that it's a good way of making money. So blogging's a tough one, especially compared to web design. It's much faster to earn good money. It takes time. I don't want to try and hype this up by saying, you know, you can make $1 million in 6 months. But compared to a lot of these other methods that we're talking about, it's much faster to earn good money as a web designer. Closely related to that, I guess, is freelance writing. But in this case, instead of writing for your own blog, this is writing for other people. There are always people who need good writers. And the pros are that you get to work from home. That's a big one there. The cons are it's a really, really bad hourly rate. Unless you're doing specialist writing perhaps, but generally speaking, it's a poor hourly rate. You've got to make a lot of money before you can get any leverage out of this business and hire other writers. You're competing with the people in the Philippines and India and as such, it's hard to make decent money as a freelance writer. Web design, quite frankly, unless you love writing and you are the sort of person that can sit there for 8 hours a day and do this sort of thing, I find that web design is far more interesting work than doing freelance writing. Again, closely related to that is the virtual assistant. My comments here are similar. You can work from home. Unlike freelance writing, as a virtual assistant, you quite often will get lots of repeat business. That's a big pro, so you don't have to forever be spending your time looking for more work. Again, my argument is that there's a poor hourly rate and there's high competition. Compare that with web design. Web design, you can get much, much larger projects. There are some exceptions to this. There are some specialist virtual assistant jobs, such as doing transcription work for the legal and health industries. Quite often they are looking for native English writers, and they pay a lot more than sort of the $5 an hour projects. But generally speaking, web design, you can get much larger projects and therefore more money. And I thought I'd throw one more in as it directly relates to what I'm doing, and so I can teach you about my teaching experience. Online training, I love it, obviously. The big pro is, again, you're working for yourself. You're not, in this case, working for clients. I got to a point where I decided I've enjoyed working with the clients. I enjoyed teaching them, but I wanted to now spend all of my time doing the teaching side. There is the potential for hiring income. Used to be a lot better. So the cons are it's tons of work to produce a training course. You need to be able to teach. There's lots of people that have produced courses, but I'm sure you've experienced with buying other courses that there's a lot of people out there that really are really bad teachers. So if you want to do this and do it well, you need to know how to teach. Also, this last one's a little harder to explain, but the perceived value has dropped. In other words, people don't see training courses costing, $3,000, $4,000. There are other people that do what I do, and they're trying to charge that sort of money. I actually think those days have gone, and in my case anyway, I'm far greater value than that. So if you're looking to get into online training, it is harder to make the big bucks that, say, even 5 years ago people were making. Contrast that to web design, it's less time to produce a profit again. Okay, so I've gone through a lot there in just trying to get those who are not yet sold on the whole web design business over the line, and considering this at least as a way that you should travel. But the reason that I enticed you to the workshop today was this whole notion of, can you really earn $4,000 a month as a part-time web designer? And not surprisingly, my answer to that is yes. Yes, you can. Many people are doing that all the time. But you know what? It's also no. Most people won't get to that level. I want to clarify a couple of things when I talk about $4,000. I mean, $4,000 really? And why $4,000? Got a lot to say about this. First of all, I'm talking about US dollars. Yes, I am an Australian, but I tend to talk and think in terms of US dollars, as that's the kind of like the universal currency of the internet. You will need to therefore translate that into dollars in your own country. I appreciate too that buying power is different from country to country, so it's a little bit hard to just do a direct exchange rate comparison. You'd need to consider what that might be worth in your country. And also, how long might this take? Now, if you really went hard and you've got a lot of business experience and you're comfortable talking with people, you know how to build a website, you can get up and running pretty quickly in 6 months is not impossible. I think, though, I'm very conscious that there's lots of people on the internet that say, you can make $1 million in 6 months. I don't want to go down that road. I want to be realistic and say that for most people, you probably want to be aiming for 12 months, might be 24 months. If you're desperate and you need this money now, I would tread very carefully. It does take time. In my case, I worked a full 2 years before I was comfortable moving from part-time to full-time. But, Richard, what does it actually take? All right, very broadly, I don't have time to go into a lot of detail today, and all I'm trying to do is get you to the point where you can answer the question, should I do this? So what does it take? It takes a system that's proven, a system that works. It takes commitment. There's not something that you should just start and just see what happens. You really do need to commit to your goal. It takes patience. Again, I'm saying that it is going to take a little while. And they're the big things to consider. I want to go over now some maths a little bit and talk about what that might look like. The actual, very broadly, the model that I teach is, the first step is you need to gather leads. A lot of people contact a couple of people, don't really get anywhere, and then give up. That's hopeless. You need lots and lots of leads, and I can teach you a way of doing that. then you need to communicate with those leads regularly, once or twice a month, possibly even weekly, using email marketing. You just contact these leads and you keep in contact with them and tell them about what you're doing and teach them about how they can improve their online web presence. And eventually, when they're ready for a new website, some of them will contact you. And so then what you're aiming for to get to that magic $4,000 mark is one $3,000 website a month and 10 recurring revenue clients at $100 a month each. A couple of comments about that. Especially for those of you who might already be doing this and thinking, $3,000 for a website, are you kidding? That's nothing. If you're stuck in the $500 website rut, I like to call it, there is a way to break out of that. It comes down to choosing better clients and building better websites. And you can do that. You can learn all of those skills. $3,000 is a relatively small amount of money for a business to invest compared to other marketing channels that they might be spending money in, if you're targeting the right sort of businesses. The little one-man business, somebody who's maybe just started in business or working at home or has a very small store, they're not really the right sort of businesses long-term. That's where you need to start if you're brand new, but to get to a $3,000 website, you need to be targeting larger businesses. The second point there is recurring revenue. I loved the fact that every month I knew that there was $2,000 or $3,000 a month coming in the door because I had maintenance tasks I was doing for people, and they were things that I was able to easily outsource. So I was starting to get great leverage into the business there as well. You can provide backup services for clients that they need. You could do their hosting for them, although I'm sort of hot and cold on that one. And there's lots of other services that you can provide. $100 a month for a business is nothing, again, compared to, say, them doing some flyers or online advertising. It's nothing. You can easily do that. That's just one model. You could do a $2,000 website a month and have 20 recurring revenue clients at $100 or 10 recurring revenue clients at $200. This is just my suggestion. So let's now talk a little bit more about what's required there. So you do need some commitment. You need to be determined to succeed. And you might like to consider a time when in your life in the past you've succeeded at something that was hard. Maybe it was back at school, university, college, going for your first job perhaps. That takes a lot of commitment, and you need that sort of commitment again to be able to succeed with this. It's very doable. When I think back to how I was when I was 25, I thought I was pretty good, but when I look back, I cringe. I was terrible. Some of the things I did and some of the things I said were just appalling. I was just in the right place at the right time. So you can succeed if you've got commitment and patience. I've said this already a couple of times, so I won't dwell on this, but it does take time. You need to be patient with you, and you need to trust the system. I love this quote here by Benjamin Franklin, so much so that I had this engraved on a tablet. Energy and persistence conquer all things. I remember when I first read that, I went, oh, come on, that's just a bit too simplistic. But if you boil it down to those two things, energy and persistence, you can conquer all things. You can get training, and if you've got the energy to be able to do this, you can definitely succeed. Now, the slide that you're looking at the moment, here in Australia, we call this a telegraph pole. You might call it a utility pole. And I want to talk briefly about why I aim so high, because for a lot of people, you might be thinking now, $4,000 a month, that's crazy. I don't need to make that sort of money. I'd be happy with, $500 a month. And if that's all you end up doing as a part-time web designer, awesome. That is fantastic. I meant to make the comment actually when I was talking about virtual assistants, because I know that some people on this workshop might be a bit offended by that, thinking, but I'm a virtual assistant and I also build websites. That's fantastic. I actually really encourage that. If you're doing the little $5 an hour virtual assistant jobs, though, you're always going to struggle. But if you can then add web design as a service, that's great. The reason that I aim so high is twofold. The first reason is because of an expression that I like, which says, in terms of goals, I'm talking about goals here. So if you aim for the stars, you'll hit the top of the telegraph pole or utility pole. If you aim for the top of the pole, you'll shoot yourself in the foot. Okay, let's think about that. So if you aim high, you might not get to your goal of reaching the stars, but you'll still get to the top of the pole, which is far greater a result than if you'd aimed for the top of the pole, because you'll get nowhere. Having big goals is, in my experience and that of many others, far more effective than it is to have just small goals. The other reason is very personal. And I've got to be a bit careful here because I can really go down this road for a long time. I'm 48. And one of the benefits of being a little bit older is that you've had life experience. And one of my experiences has been that everybody goes through some sort of crisis, in our case, several, in their lives. In my case, it culminated with one of my children getting a life-threatening illness and having to spend a good 2 years helping him through that, doing well now. Damage from the experience, but should be okay. And then when I've contemplated all of that, thinking, you know, why me and all of that, I've realised that a lot of people go through incredibly tough times in their life. It's likely, sorry to tell you if you're in your 20s, that you will also face some sort of crisis in your life, and perhaps more than once. I really want to encourage you to build a business that not only is making decent money, but is working for you, that has some leverage, so that when you hit these hurdles in life, that the business won't collapse, as it did in my case, but instead will continue without you to some extent, so that that income can keep going and you don't have the added stress of dealing with the crisis as also not having enough income coming in. If you're fortunate enough where you don't hit those same sorts of hurdles, or the hurdles aren't as large as they have been for me and others, then you're in a unique position to be able to help others who might be facing such a hardship, family members, friends. Wouldn't it be fantastic if you're in a position to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to pay your mortgage bill this month. I'm going to be able to take your kids to school because I've got extra time on my hands. That's a fantastic thing that you'll very rarely hear in any of this sort of training, because it's normally always about time and money. Just something to consider, and as I said, I don't want to go down that road too long, but this is part of the reason why I really encourage people to build good, solid businesses, not just a little thing on the side. Again, if that's what you want to do, great, but something of substance for that reason. There you go, something to consider. Okay, now, yes, just on that last point, the reason I've got that slide there is then you've also got a business that has value, an asset that one day you can sell. What's the point of working for 40 years if it's just you and at the end you've got nothing? It's a risk to be in business to some extent. It's not as easy as just going to a 9-to-5 job and getting a paycheck every week. Therefore, you should be rewarded for that. And one of the ways is to have a business of value. To have a business of value, you need a team, you need systems in place, and you need recurring revenue. Then one day you'll actually be able to sell your business. If it's just you, then there's nothing really for the business to sell. Okay, there are now 3 things you need to consider to be able to answer the question, have you got it? What it takes to be able to make that sort of money or to start a web design business. Excuse me. And the 3 are time, money, and skill. Now, if you did happen to get an opportunity to look through the email that was supposed to come to you yesterday, that asked the question, how many hours per week do you have to spend on your business? I think I asked from memory 5 hours, 5 to 10, and 10 to 20. So how many hours do you have available right now to work in your business? I'll make some comments about this, because if your answer is less than 5 hours a week, look, you can still do this, but I'm not going to encourage you to do websites. It can take, once you're on top of things, maybe 10 hours, but let's say 40 hours to build a typical website when you're beginning. If you've only got 5 hours a week, then that's going to be a bit of a struggle. Like I said, once you've got the skills, you can knock these things over pretty quickly. If you had 5 hours, I'd be encouraging you to do something a bit different. Do maintenance tasks. Go and look for some websites in your local area that haven't been updated for a while, that have problems. Contact those business owners and just offer to help them. Getting some maintenance clients means you've got some good recurring revenue coming in. That's a really good side hustle and doesn't then require you to have all the high-end skills that you need to build websites. If you said 5 to 10 hours a week, getting closer, but it is still going to be a bit of a struggle to build decent sized websites. In this case, I'd encourage you to consider offering a service, such as email marketing for small businesses, maybe social media marketing if you have those skills, helping out a business with their online presence, say with Facebook and Instagram and all that sort of thing. On 5 to 10 hours a week, you could get a few clients a month there, and that would again be a really nice side hustle. If though you're serious about actually building websites and making the sort of money that I'm talking about, then 20 hours would be best. 10 hours you could just scrape through for smaller websites. That's the sort of mark, and that's what a part-time job tends to be, about 20 hours a week. Also, seeing as though we're talking about time, want to talk a little bit more in depth about the whole part-time, full-time thing. I told you earlier that one of the things that I did was to start part-time, and I actually encourage you, if you've already got a job, to stick at doing this part-time if possible. It's hard. It's hard to have a full-time job during the day and then come home in the evenings and do this. It's ideal. This is what I was able to do. I was able to work 3 days a week in my job and then 2 days a week on the website side of things. That can work really well if you've got that flexibility. I appreciate not everyone's in that position. You might have recently been retrenched, you might be retired, or you might have a few dollars under your belt and you just say, I just want to get into this full time. That's great. If you have some sort of significant other who is earning a full-time income, that's an opportunity then for you to get into this as well. All right, so the second big point, so that's time. Time and money tend to go hand in hand. And I asked the question, how much money are you prepared to invest in your business? And this is really an important one to consider, because if you're going into traditional business, such as starting a retail store or perhaps a restaurant, your startup costs are huge. It's not uncommon for these sorts of businesses to cost tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to fit out the store or the restaurant. And that comes with pros and cons. The big disadvantage, of course, is that you've got a lot of money invested in this and you've had to have got that money from somewhere. And this is, that's a bad thing, but it's also a good thing, because I guarantee you that when you've got this amount of money invested in your business, you're going to get up every day and go to work. You need to make this work. It's going to push you along. One of the disadvantages in the web design business is that the startup costs are actually too low. With just a few dollars, you can start your web design business. You've probably got all the things that you need already, apart perhaps from skills and business training. And you think, well, that's great. What a fantastic business to start. No, it's not always so great. The downside of this is that it means you don't treat it seriously enough. It also means that there's lots of people that get into it because it's so easy. And so there's massive, massive competition. Of course, many of the people that get into this have very poor quality skills, both in terms of business and in terms of being able to build websites. And that quite often will result in abandoned projects. Once you get into web design, you'll find that you'll get contacted by people that say, my web designer left me halfway through this project, can you finish it? It's quite common, unfortunately. So web design startup costs are very low, and I'm suggesting that's not always a good thing. But let's have a think about, how did you answer this? And I'll make some comments as to what I think you need to consider here. So how much money are you prepared to invest? Is it less than $500? Okay, yeah, it's absolutely possible. You can start this business for under $500 and get going and get projects and actually start a real business. However, I'm going to encourage you to think a little bit higher and treat this like a real business, because that's what it is. If you've got $500 to $1,000, well, that is a better place to start. There are some insurances that I encourage people to consider. You probably should be talking to an accountant at some point as well to get your business set up. So that's closer to the mark. I, though, really think that you need to be seriously considering $1,000 to $3,000, particularly if you're talking about, getting to that $4,000 a month mark. This will give you the extra headroom to get some additional training on the business side of things, to consider some other expenses, like maybe your computer's a bit old, or maybe you need some software. I'm a big fan of starting on a shoestring, but at the same time, if you've invested that sort of money, you're more likely to treat it like a real business. And if you're talking $3,000 plus, absolutely you're in the right ballpark with this. You can get running for that sort of money. Okay, and the last of the three is skill. What skills do you need to pay the bills? How well can you build websites? Ultimately, that's the big skill that we're providing. And so I've got 4 possibilities here. You might be at the point where you say, I know nothing. I don't know how to build websites. Or you might say, yeah, I know the basics. Or perhaps you've built websites before. That's fantastic. Or maybe you are an expert already and that you know lots about building websites. Let's consider each of these 4 and think about where you're sitting right now. If you're saying, I know nothing, and for those of you who are a bit younger than me, this is Sergeant Schultz. You can Google him later. You need to know at least what's possible. So it is possible to start a web design business without knowing much about websites, but you're going to struggle compared to someone who does. What I mean by you need to know what's possible. So how does a website work? Do you have some basic understanding of what a database is? You know, don't you, that there's buttons and you can click on them and they take you to other pages and there's a menu along the top and the sorts of elements that you might find on a website. Even if all you've done all your life is interacted with websites, you've never built one, you could get started if you know someone who can do the building side of things. I'll come back about a story about that in a moment. If you're at the point where you know the basics, maybe you've built a website or 2 or 3, that's great. Actually, no, what I meant by that comment is probably before you get started, you should build a website or 3 to get the hang of the process of what's actually involved in building a website before you really launch yourself out to the general world. Again, you can absolutely do this. You might still need some help from people if you get stuck with something technical. Number 3, if you've built websites before, if you've got the skills, there are people willing to pay you today to build a website for them. Website projects are sold every day. You can start right now. Still encourage you to get some things like insurances and your business name set up, but you're absolutely in the right place. Therefore, if you know lots, you're in the right place too, right? Well, not necessarily. Hang on a sec. Excuse me. All right. There is actually a danger in being really technical. Being a techie can actually work against you, because I've seen this so many times where people who are great at building websites think that they know everything, but they aren't going into a project with enough empathy for what the client needs for their business side. And as a result, their conversation might be talking in terms of the design or the technical side of the website, and forgetting the fact that at the end of the day, a business owner wants to be able to make more money or save money or make their business life easier with a website. So this is one occasion where it can actually be a bit more challenging. No, we're not up to the Q&A yet. Sorry, let me put Sergeant Schultz back. I wanted to make a comment. There are tons of people that can help you with the tech side of things out there for relatively low cost. I did at one point work with a middleman who kind of found us and said, look, I can throw website work your way. He knew very little about websites. He was more like Sergeant Schultz. He was able to envisage what a website could look like. He knew that you could do certain things, but he was a real networker, and he'd go out to networking events all the time, talk to people, and discover that some of those people needed websites. And he'd say, well, I can build a website for you. And then he'd come to me and my designer, and we'd do the site. We never had any interaction with the client. So he was the classic middleman, but his skill set was fairly low. And he entrusted us to do this. That's a very viable model for those who know enough about websites. It's frustrating as a developer to have clients like that, by the way, because you're not making nearly as much money. And so we had to, in the end, weigh up whether that was worth our while. And that brings me to the end of the formal part of this presentation.
That's the end of the workshop replay, but it's not the end of your journey. If you answered yes to the question, should I do this? Then the next question is, can I do this? I'd love to help you answer this by showing you how to create your web design business plan. You'll learn the 5 factors that determine how a business makes a profit. Then you'll use that knowledge to create your unique business plan that, when executed, ensures that your web design business is one of the ones that is successful at the start, continues to grow, and has value, so one day you can sell it. There is normally a fee for this course, but thanks to TemplateMonster, I'm able to bring it to you for free. Head over to learn.siteskills.com and look for the course titled Create Your Web Design Business Plan. Use the coupon code MONSTER during checkout and it's all yours. I trust you found this workshop helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch.